Have you ever stopped to think about how you would actually measure something as big and, as complicated as culture? I mean, really measure it, like with science. It's a huge question, and it's one that social scientists have been wrestling with for a long, long time. So today, we're going to dig into that. We're going to look at two really big and actually very different ideas about how to do it. Let's get into it. It really all boils down to this one simple question that I bet we've all asked ourselves at some point, right? Why are things done so differently in different places? Why do societies have such different feelings about life, family, and work? This curiosity, this is what kicks off the whole search for patterns in the amazing, sometimes confusing web of human societies. All right, our first stop on this journey is a really foundational theory. And what's interesting is that it doesn't start with a bunch of data or surveys. Nope, it starts with a pretty profound idea that every single society, it doesn't matter where or when, has to find an answer to the same 5 basic questions about what it means to be human. And this is it, the Kluckholm-Strodbeck value orientations theory. It sounds complex, but the idea is simple. A culture's unique identity comes from how it tends to answer these 5 things. So, for example, is human nature basically good or evil or maybe a mix? When it comes to time, is the focus on the past and tradition, or living in the now, or always planning for the future? How about our relationship with nature? Should we control it, live in harmony with it, or just accept its power over us? Then there's activity. Is life about just being, expressing yourself in the moment? Or is it all about doing, striving, achieving, getting things done? And finally, how are we all connected? Is it about the individual first, the wider group, or is there a clear hierarchy we all fit into? This theory says that every culture has a unique fingerprint based on its answers. Okay, so that philosophical approach is really fascinating, right? But what if you wanted to get more concrete? What if you wanted to actually put a number on culture, to compare different countries side by side? Well, that leads us straight into our second theory, which is probably the most famous and controversial one out there. So back in the 1980s, this Dutch researcher, Gerrit Hofstede, did something that nobody had really done before on this scale. He got his hands on this absolutely massive treasure trove of data, surveys from over 100,000 IBM employees in countries all over the world. He just dove in, crunched all those numbers, and came out with a model that would basically shape the entire field of cross-cultural studies for decades to come. So what did all that data actually show? What did he find? Let's take a look at some of his most important dimensions of culture. And since this is for you guys, we'll take a special look at what his findings had to say about Taiwan. First up is the big one, the one everyone's heard of, individualism versus collectivism. Now, this isn't just about whether you like being alone or in a crowd. It's much deeper. It's about what a society sees as its most basic unit. Is it all about the I, or is it all about the we? In really individualistic cultures, your personal achievements and what you do are what define you. But in collectivistic cultures, your identity is tied much more to the groups you belong to, your family, your company, your community. And wow, this chart just lays it out perfectly. Look at that. The United States scores a massive 91, making it one of the most individualistic places on the planet, according to this study. And then you look at Taiwan with a score of 17. I mean, that is a huge, huge difference. What this model suggests is a culture where group harmony, loyalty, and relationships are way more important than individual ambition. Okay, next up is a really interesting one called long-term versus short-term orientation. This dimension actually came a bit later, and it grew out of a study specifically designed to be less Western-centric. So what does it measure? Well, it's about a society's time horizon. Is the focus on quick results and respecting traditions from the past? That's short-term. Or is it all about planning for the future? Valuing things like saving money, being persistent, and investing for what's to come. That's long-term orientation. And check this out, Taiwan's score here is 87, which is one of the highest in the entire world. This points to a really pragmatic culture, one that values planning and saving for the long haul. You can see Japan is also pretty high up there at 80. But then you look at the US, way down at 29. That suggests a culture that's much more focused on getting results right now. Let's do one more, power distance. This one is super important for understanding things like workplaces and family dynamics. It's not about whether power is unequal. Hofstede said it's unequal everywhere. The real question is, how much do people accept that inequality? In high power distance cultures, hierarchy is just a fact of life. You expect the boss to be the boss, and you don't really question authority. But in low power distance cultures, people expect to be treated more as equals and want to have their opinions heard. So where does Taiwan land? Right here at 58. It's kind of in the middle of the pack. It's way higher than a country like Austria, which is super egalitarian with a score of 11, but it's much, much lower than a country like Malaysia, which is way up at 104. So a score of 58 suggests a society that, yeah, accepts a certain amount of hierarchy, but isn't extremely rigid or authoritarian about it. Okay, so we've got all these nice, clean numbers and charts, and it feels like they explain so much, right? It seems so simple. And honestly, it might be just plain wrong. Because as popular and influential as Hofstede's work has been, it has also come under some really, really serious fire from other researchers. And this question right here gets to the absolute heart of the problem. Seriously, think about it. Can a survey of people who worked for one company, IBM, mostly in sales and mostly men from like 50 years ago, can that really tell us about the culture of an entire country today? A whole lot of critics would say, no way. And the list of problems is pretty long. First off, the survey he used wasn't even designed to measure culture. It was about job satisfaction at IBM. The sample group was incredibly narrow, as we said. Plus, in some countries, he based the entire nation's score on fewer than 200 responses. On top of all that, the model treats culture like it's frozen in amber. But we all know cultures change. And maybe the biggest nail in the coffin, other researchers have tried to replicate his study, and they just can't get the same results. That's a huge problem in science. So, all of these criticisms, they don't just poke a few holes in Hofstede's theory. They actually force us to step back and ask a much bigger and honestly a more uncomfortable question about this whole project of trying to measure culture in the first place. Right? I mean, if a giant study with over 100,000 people can have so many fundamental flaws, then maybe the problem isn't just the study itself. Maybe the problem is the very thing it's trying to measure. Is there really such a thing as one single unified Taiwanese culture or American culture? Or are countries just too big, too full of different people, and changing too fast to ever be boiled down to a handful of numbers? We're going to end on this really powerful and provocative thought from Brendan McSweeney, one of Hofstede's biggest critics. He said that any such thing as national culture is a mere illusion. Wow. So, what do you think? Are models like Hofstede's a useful, if imperfect, way to understand the world? Or are they just creating neat stereotypes that aren't really true? That's a fantastic question to think about.